It was a crisp December morning in the village of Little Grantsworth, the kind of day when the frost glimmered on the hedgerows and the smoke from the chimneys curled like lazy fingers into the pale winter sky. The villagers were bustling with last-minute preparations for the annual Christmas fete at Thornley Manor, the grand but slightly faded estate of Sir Reginald Havisham. The manor, with its ivy-clad facade and towering chimneys, had a reputation as much for its cosy elegance as for the odd scandal that seemed to attach itself to every Havisham generation. Miss Jane Marple, visiting her old friend Mrs. Lydia Petheridge at her small cottage on the edge of the village, observed the bustle with quiet amusement. Clad in her usual neat tweed coat and woolen scarf, she tucked a curl of her hair beneath her hat and peered through the window at a group of children dragging a snow-laden sledge down the lane. There was a crisp, sweet smell of pine from the market stalls, mingled with roasted chestnuts, and Marple sighed contentedly. She always enjoyed returning to Little Grantsworth during the festive season. "Ah, Jane," Mrs. Petheridge said, bustling about her kitchen, "you've come at the right time. The village is alive with excitement. The fete will be splendid this year." Marple smiled, pouring herself a cup of tea. "I dare say, Lydia, although I do hope it won't be too eventful." She sipped delicately. Eventful, she thought, was often a polite word for disaster. At Thornley Manor, preparations were equally intense. Sir Reginald, a portly man with a ruddy complexion and a booming voice, was overseeing the decorations, insisting that every bauble and tinsel strand be in perfect alignment. His daughter, Cecily Havisham, a bright and energetic young woman, flitted about arranging flowers and coordinating the volunteers. Mr. Arthur Langley, Sir Reginald's cousin and occasional business partner, stood nearby, frowning over the guest list, muttering about last-minute cancellations and the expense of hiring a Santa Claus. The chosen Santa was, in fact, the local baker, Mr. George Penhaligon, who had reluctantly agreed to don the red suit for a modest fee, encouraged by Cecily's persuasive charm. Penhaligon's cheeks were already rosy from the cold as he rehearsed his jolly laugh, though his eyes betrayed a touch of apprehension. Marple arrived at Thornley Manor under the pretext of observing the village festivities and paying her seasonal regards. She had long known the Havishams. Their family history of eccentricities and minor scandals made them fascinating to her keen eye for human behaviour. The inciting incident occurred on the evening of the Christmas Eve ball held in the grand hall of Thornley Manor. Guests arrived in their finest attire, the glittering chandeliers casting a warm glow over the polished oak floors. Among the attendees were Dr. Peter Carrington, a respected local physician, Miss Margaret Fenwick, a distant cousin with a penchant for gossip, and Mr. Thomas Wilkins, the manor's solicitor. Santa Penhaligon had just been ushered to his appointed chair when a sudden commotion erupted. Cecily screamed, and the hall fell silent. Santa, it seemed, had collapsed, his red hat rolling across the polished floor. Dr. Carrington rushed forward, examining him. After a tense moment, he shook his head. "I'm afraid he's dead." A chill ran through the room even despite the roaring fires. Murmurs spread among the guests. Sir Reginald looked pale, but his voice remained firm. This must be an accident. Perhaps he tripped. Marple, however, felt the familiar spark of curiosity. Accidents, in her experience, were often less innocent than they appeared. She discreetly observed the surrounding details, the position of the chair, the slight discoloration on Penhaligon's lips, and the faint smell of almonds, which reminded her of bitter almonds, a known signature of cyanide. The local constable, Inspector Hargrave, arrived promptly, cordially but with a heavy air of duty. "No one is to leave the premises," he instructed, his eyes scanning the faces of the assembled guests. "This is a matter for investigation." Marple ever polite, offered her assistance. "Inspector, you may find my observations of human behaviour, particularly in small villages, somewhat useful." Hargrave's eyebrows rose. He was a practical man, unaccustomed to the quiet intuition Marple embodied, yet he nodded. "I shall bear that in mind, Miss Marple. The initial investigation revealed little. Penhaligon's chair was knocked slightly askew, but there were no signs of struggle. The guests, though shaken, were composed, each offering versions of the events that were conflicting in minor details. Cecily claimed she saw Santa clutching his chest before falling. One of the servants insisted he had seemed perfectly well moments before. As the night deepened and the manor settled into uneasy quiet, Marple retired to her guest room. She sipped her tea thoughtfully, listening to the distant hoot of an owl. The warmth of the fire contrasted with the icy threads of suspicion weaving through her mind. One thing was certain. This was no ordinary accident. The following morning the manor was a flurry of hushed conversations. Inspector Hargrave had begun formal interviews, but Marple preferred her own method. She wandered through the corridors, observing, questioning softly, and noting tiny inconsistencies. Her first conversation was with Cecily Havisham. The young woman's cheeks were flushed with emotion, her hands trembling. "I just can't believe it," she said. "He was supposed to bring joy. It's dreadful." "Yes, my dear," Marple said gently, "but sometimes understanding the truth behind such tragedies can prevent further harm." Cecily hesitated, then admitted, "I know father had disagreements with Mr. Langley recently about the family finances. But could it really have led to this?" Marple merely nodded thoughtfully. Financial motives were common, though rarely the whole story. She next spoke with Mr. Arthur Langley, who was brisk and defensive. "It's preposterous to suggest I had any interest in this," he said, glancing nervously at the servants. "I may grumble about business, but I am not a murderer." "Of course, Mr. Langley," Marple replied softly, "but one must always consider what drives a person to desperation." Marple's investigation led her to Miss Margaret Fenwick, whose eyes sparkled with mischief. "I did overhear Santa arguing with someone about a missing package," Margaret said. "He seemed very agitated, but of course I didn't pay much attention. I assumed it was trivial. Details, she knew, were crucial. Even the smallest observation could unravel a case." She examined the scene of the collapse. The chair was indeed slightly off balance. On the floor lay the remnants of Penhaligon's bag of gifts, small toys scattered in an oddly geometric pattern, as though arranged deliberately. Marple bent down, inspecting them. One small toy, a wooden train, had a faint smudge of red powder, hardly noticeable, but enough to pique her curiosity. Later she spoke with the servants, who were tight-lipped, but not without hints. One whispered, "I thought I saw Mr. Wilkins slip something into Santa's drink earlier, but I can't be sure." Marple smiled inwardly. Small villages always had their share of secrets, and the servants often knew more than they admitted. By mid-afternoon she had pieced together an outline of relationships, grudges, and small humiliations. Sir Reginald's business troubles, Langley's impatience with the family finances, Cecily's youthful impatience with secrecy, Margaret's delight in gossip, and Wilkins' quiet observation, all were threads in a complex tapestry. Marple also noticed the little things, the faint whiff of almonds again, this time near the punch bowl, the positioning of chairs and tables, the slight smudge of lipstick on the glass where the drink had been served. Every tiny detail suggested preparation, not accident. As the investigation deepened, new twists emerged. A letter was discovered in Santa's coat pocket, a threatening note demanding repayment of an old debt. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but Marple noted its precise slant and even spacing. Meanwhile, the villagers began to whisper. Some suggested the death was revenge for a financial dispute. Others claimed it was a malicious prank gone wrong. Cecily confessed she had argued with Penhaligon earlier that week over a missing set of decorative bells. Langley's alibi was shakier than he admitted. He had left the room briefly, claiming to check on supplies, but witnesses placed him nearby the punch bowl. Marple observed all these events with quiet precision. She noted the conflicting statements, the nervous gestures, and even the way some characters attempted to divert attention with trivial complaints. She knew well the art of the red herring. A second clue came unexpectedly, a small vial hidden behind the fireplace containing a faint residue of powdered poison. It matched the red smudge on the wooden train. Clearly, someone had planned carefully, intending the poison to be ingested indirectly. Dr. Carrington, upon questioning, revealed that Penhaligon's death was consistent with cyanide poisoning, fast-acting, almost instantaneous. It explained the collapse and the absence of visible struggle. Suspicion swirled. Was it Langley, enraged by financial disagreements? Miss Fenwick, eager to stir drama? Or perhaps the solicitor, Wilkins, quietly enforcing a secret vendetta? Each motive was plausible, yet none entirely satisfactory. Marple reflected on human behaviour. In her experience, murder rarely stemmed from a single factor. It was a mixture of greed, resentment, and opportunity, often layered beneath appearances of civility. Miss Marple called a discreet gathering in the Manor's drawing-room. She had observed and collected evidence carefully over the past 2 days, and the pattern was becoming clear. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone gentle but firm, "I have paid close attention to the events surrounding Mr. Penhaligon's death. While several motives existed, the method was deliberate. The red powder, the small vial, the placement of the toys, all indicate someone with knowledge of chemistry and access to manner." She paused, letting her words settle. "Furthermore, the person knew our dear Santa would be consuming a drink during the festivities. The poison was administered in such a way that it appeared accidental, yet it was anything but." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Marple continued. "The key clue is this," she said, holding up the wooden train. "Observe the smudge here. This was transferred from a hand that handled the powder, by process of elimination, and understanding human behaviour it points to the person who had both motive and opportunity." She turned to Mr. Thomas Wilkins, whose composure was beginning to falter. "You, Mr. Wilkins, saw an opportunity to settle an old score. Your subtle knowledge of chemistry, combined with your quiet observation of the Manor's operations, allowed you to execute this plan. The threatening letter was a diversion meant to implicate another party, but the smallest detail betrayed you." Wilkins' face went pale, and he stammered, I don't know what you mean." Marple, with her usual calmness, replied, "I am afraid the evidence is clear. The red smudge, the vial behind the fireplace, and your presence near the punch bowl cannot be explained by mere coincidence. The crime is solved. The morning after the arrest of Mr. Thomas Wilkins dawned crisp and clear over Little Gransworth. Frost clung to the hedgerows and the delicate lacework of spider webs strung between the bare branches, catching the pale winter sunlight in tiny sparkling diamonds. The villagers moved about with a curious combination of relief and lingering unease. The news had spread. The death of Santa Penhaligon had been no accident, and the culprit had been caught. Yet even with justice on its way, the air was thick with lingering questions and half-whispered speculations. Miss Marple, having observed the night's events from her discreet vantage point, rose early. The Manor's great hall was quiet. the only sounds being the occasional scurry of servants preparing breakfast and the crackle of the enormous fireplace. She dressed meticulously in her winter tweeds, fastening her scarf and ensuring her sensible shoes were laced snugly. There was always something satisfying about a problem brought to light and resolved, though the sadness of a lost life remained. Breakfast at Thornley Manor was a subdued affair. Sir Reginald Havisham, usually loud and commanding, ate in silence, a far-away look in his eyes. Cecily, his daughter, moved about the table with gentle efficiency, pouring tea and offering toast, her eyes occasionally welling with unshed tears. The staff were polite but reserved, mindful of the scrutiny Miss Marple could bring to every detail. "You see, Miss Marple," Sir Reginald said, his voice soft but carrying a hint of his usual gravitas, "it is astonishing how well you read people. I should have known that Wilkins, so calm, so respectable, could harbour such resentment." Marple sipped her tea and smiled faintly. "Sometimes it is the very respectability of a person that allows them to conceal their motives most effectively, Sir Reginald. The ordinary masks the extraordinary, or in this case the sinister." Cecily shook her head slightly. "I still cannot believe it. To think that Wilkins would stoop to murder, and over what exactly?" Marple leaned back and regarded the young woman with gentle scrutiny. "It was not a matter of simple greed, my dear. It was, as so often happens, a combination of old grievances, resentment, and opportunity. Wilkins was aware of Penhaligon's routine, knew the manor well, and understood that no one would suspect him. He thought to manipulate the festive atmosphere to his advantage." Sir Reginald sighed, resting a hand on his forehead. "It is almost inconceivable. Wilkins has worked for this family for years. He knew the household intimately, and yet he chose to betray that trust in such a cruel way." "The betrayal of trust is a familiar thread in many such cases," and Marple replied softly. "People often act not out of necessity, but from a sense of personal grievance or wounded pride. In Wilkins' mind, he may have convinced himself of the righteousness of his action." After breakfast, Marple took a quiet walk around the manor grounds. The snow lay pristine and untouched in some places, while elsewhere children had made tracks in their early morning play. The air was bracing, the scent of pine and wood smoke filling her lungs. She paused to observe the ice-laden fountain at the centre of the garden, the water frozen midst, burnt like delicate crystal. It was during this walk that she reflected more deeply on the sequence of events. The poisoned drink, the red powder on the wooden train, the hidden vial, all were parts of a carefully constructed plan. Yet, as always, the smallest human foibles betrayed Wilkins. The smudge of the powder, the subtle gestures, the nervous glance at Cecily when questioned, all had contributed to his unravelling. Returning indoors, Marple joined Cecily, who was arranging flowers in the grand hall. "Miss Marple," she said quietly, "I suppose it is over now. Wilkins is in custody, and the village can breathe. But how do we explain this to everyone else, the guests, the neighbours? Truth is always preferable, my dear," Marple replied. "People often fear the revelation more than the event itself. A clear, honest account, tempered with compassion, will reassure them." By midday, Inspector Hargrave arrived at the manor to oversee Wilkins' formal statements and transport. He greeted Marple with his customary efficiency. "Miss Marple, I must admit your deductions were most impressive. The evidence aligns perfectly with your observations." Marple inclined her head. "Observations are merely the starting point, Inspector. One must pay attention to details others dismiss. Gestures, tone, the smallest inconsistencies, those are where the truth often hides." Hargrave nodded. "I shall ensure the villagers receive an accurate account, though I suspect some will still speculate." "Speculation," Marple said gently, "is as natural to village life as the annual fete. What matters is that justice is done and that people are safe. Meanwhile, Sir Reginald convened a meeting of the household staff to clarify the sequence of events and ensure that the manor returned to order. The butler, Mr. Hemming, a tall man with a precise manner, spoke first. "We must remain vigilant, sir. The manor's reputation must be preserved, and the household's well-being restored." "Yes, Hemming," Sir Reginald replied, "and I must thank each of you for your composure during this unsettling time. Your discretion and efficiency have been commendable." The villagers of Little Gransworth were next informed. Word spread quickly from the manor to the local shops, the post office, and the church. Conversations in the market and along the snowy lanes were filled with a mix of relief and renewed curiosity. Many expressed astonishment that someone of Wilkins's apparent integrity could commit such a crime. Others quietly praised Miss Marple's insight, though she herself remained modest. That afternoon Marple sat with Cecily in the drawing-room. The young woman's expression was contemplative. "It is strange," she said. "The village has returned to normal so quickly, yet the memory of Santa's death lingers. How do we move on?" "Time, my dear," Marple replied, "and the small joys that remind us of the season's spirit. A village life is resilient. Little Gransworth will remember the lesson of vigilance, but it will not allow fear to dominate." As the evening approached, Marple joined Sir Reginald and Cecily for tea. The fire glowed warmly, and the snow outside had begun to glisten under the rising moon. The conversation turned to lighter matters, the next year's Christmas fete, the improvement of the manor's gardens, and even the mischief of village children building snowmen in unlikely shapes. Sir Reginald, looking thoughtfully into his cup, said, "Miss Marple, I hope you will return next Christmas. You have a talent for bringing clarity where confusion reigns, and, if I may say, your presence brings a certain calm to the household." Marple smiled, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "I shall consider it, Sir Reginald, but I must admit I enjoy observing quietly the rhythms of village life. Mysteries, though, are best encountered occasionally, not incessantly." Cecily laughed softly. "Nevertheless, Jane, you are a gift to Little Gransworth." The following days were spent in restorative quiet. Wilkins had been formally taken into custody, and the legal proceedings were set in motion. The villagers, while still whispering, returned to their routines. Shops opened, carol practices continued, and the church prepared for the Christmas service. Marple took time to walk the village, noting the small domestic details she loved: a scarf drying on a line, the faint aroma of baking bread from a nearby cottage, a cat curled beside a window, watching the world with sleepy patience. These simple observations were, in her mind, as important as the resolution of any crime. They reminded her that life, despite its shadows, carried continuity and warmth. A few days later, Sir Reginald organized a small gathering to formally thank those who had assisted in clarifying the events. Guests included Dr. Carrington, Mrs. Petheridge, and key household staff. Marple, seated quietly in a corner with her teacup, watched the interactions with keen satisfaction. Relationships had shifted subtly. Respect for her discernment was apparent in nods and murmured comments. Villagers who had initially doubted her now seemed to regard her as an indispensable observer of human nature. During the gathering, Cecily pulled Marple aside. "Jane, the children are asking about Santa. How shall we explain it?" Marple thought for a moment, then smiled. "Truthfully but gently. Let them understand that not all actions are simple, but that kindness and honesty remain the stronger path. And perhaps remind them that Santa, in spirit, remains with those who believe in joy and generosity." Cecily nodded. "Yes, I suppose that is the best way." Marple reflected once more on the entire affair. Wilkins's motives were petty, human, and understandable in the worst sense of the word, but they were also preventable. Attentiveness, care, and a keen eye for small, telling details had unravelled the mystery. In a quiet way, it was a testament to the enduring value of observation and empathy. As evening fell, Marple prepared to depart. Mrs. Petheridge helped her into her cloak. "Another adventure solved, Jane," she said fondly. "Indeed, Lydia," Marple replied, fastening her scarf. "And may little Gransworth enjoy a peaceful Christmas, unmarred by misfortune, for the remainder of the season." The carriage pulled away, and Marple glanced back at Thornley Manor. Its windows glowed warmly against the snow, the promise of a restored holiday spirit radiating outward. She knew the Havershams would rebuild both their cheer and their confidence, while the village would continue resilient and observant. And as the sleigh bells faintly echoed in the distance, Marple allowed herself a small smile. Even in the midst of tragedy there was clarity, there was justice, and there was always the quiet magic of human understanding.